At the south end of this little town, just across from the Yankee Jim trading post and the Bear Creek restaurant, stands a massive stone arch marking the north entrance of Yellowstone National Park. The cement plaque reads, "Created by Act of Congress March 1st, 1872, testimony to the fact that here beyond lies a piece of demarcated terrain, 2.2 million acres of woodland and meadows and geyser basins holding special status, the world's first national park." Almost 125 years later, it's still the most treasured square of more or less natural landscape on the continent, visited by several million tourists every summer. Loiter beside that arch on a hot midsummer morning, and you will see them arriving. Groups of tour buses, couples in Japanese sedans, families in station wagons with aluminum lawn chairs lashed to the roofs. They're all drawn here by the conviction that Yellowstone is somehow extraordinary. Its attractions distinct from what can be seen in eastern Wyoming or along the interstate that leads to Salt Lake City. Still, not many of those visitors recognize, as they pass through the Gardner Gateway, that they're crossing into an island. But they are, at least for some species, including the grizzly bear, most imposing of all native fauna. Yellowstone is an insular world set apart from what surrounds it. The island at issue isn't Yellowstone proper, but a larger and more organic entity known as the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. The ecosystem encompasses both Yellowstone and Grand Teton parks, plus portions of 7 national forests and more, constituting an amoeboid parcel of largely undeveloped landscape that totals more than 15 million acres. All around that parcel lies an ocean of human impact in the form of ranches and highways and towns, suburbs and malls, gun shops and golf courses. This sort of insularity carries menacing implications not just for Yellowstone, but for every other parcel of protected natural landscape on the continent, from Baxter State Park in Maine to Joshua Tree National Monument in South California. Why menacing? Because insularity is conducive to extinction. Islands are, all too often, where species and populations die. Call it the island syndrome. One authoritative tally offers these figures as a mere sampling. Within the past 4 centuries, 171 species and subspecies of bird have gone extinct. Of those extinctions, 155 occurred on islands. That's 90%, despite the fact that only about 20% of the planet's bird species are island dwellers. Clearly, island birds face a much higher probability of extinction than mainland birds do. It's true also among animals and plants overall. Island species are more readily extinguished than mainland species. Why do island creatures go extinct? The reasons are complicated, but at their base lie 2 simple factors: population size and population fluctuation. All populations fluctuate in size from year to year in response to good conditions, gentle weather, abundant food, and the bad conditions, drought, harsh winters, famine, they encounter. The small populations are more likely to fluctuate to zero when conditions are bad, since zero is never far away. With less margin of security, a small population is also more vulnerable to the various forms of human persecution and natural catastrophe that can deliver a coup de grace. Therefore, small populations face a greater risk of extinction than big populations. And island populations, including those trapped within ecological islands such as a park surrounded by development, tend to be small. Within the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, for instance, there are more than 300 or 400 grizzly bears, utterly isolated from grizzly populations elsewhere. 300 is probably too small for comfort. And so this Yellowstone population shares at least some of the jeopardy of the most famous of all extinct island birds, the dodo. An important corollary of the island syndrome is that small islands generally support fewer species than big islands do. Why? Because they support bigger populations of each species and therefore endure fewer extinctions. Biologists refer to that as the species-area relationship. All of this carries implications, as I mentioned, for the national parks, designated wildernesses, wildlife reserves, and other forms of protected natural landscape set aside in our country or any other. One of the main premises behind establishing those parks and reserves is that by protecting in perpetuity a patch of landscape, we can protect in perpetuity the ecological community within it. We can save species, but 4 decades of modern scientific thinking about the species-area relationship, combined with recent research by a fellow named William Newmark, suggests that such protection isn't necessarily perpetual. Sometimes it's only temporary. Insularized populations go extinct, even when the island is protected by act of Congress. In a paper published in the journal Conservation Biology last year, Mr. Newmark reported that 29 mammal populations have disappeared from national parks in western North America due to no other factor than the island syndrome. The red fox is missing from Bryce Canyon National Park in southern Utah. The mink is gone from Yosemite. The river otter, the spotted skunk, and the ermine are absent from Crater Lake National Park in Oregon. Not hunted out, not poisoned out, but apparently squeezed out by the sheer insularity of their situation. Mr. Newmark listed all 29 cases with documentation and noted a telling pattern. The smaller the park, the more mammal species lost. His conclusion? Areas considerably larger than most parks in western North America will need to be managed if the historical mammal faunal assemblages within the parks are to be reestablished. The Greater Yellowstone ecosystem is one such larger area, and so far it seems to have suffered no island syndrome losses. But the grizzly bear, with its big territorial demands and small population, is at risk. By the time your great-grandchildren visit Yellowstone, it could be gone. Meanwhile, even the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem grows ever smaller and more tattered. Timber sales reduce the wooded acreage of its national forests. A major gold mine is threatened just outside the park's northeast corner, and habitat is being lost to housing sprawl, in some cases for environmentalists who insist on living in the country on private lands. As the Yellowstone island becomes smaller, the prognosis for the big bear becomes gloomier. But it isn't just Yellowstone, and it isn't just the grizzly. All over the world, the exigent needs and demands of people have left natural landscapes reduced and fragmented. Nature itself, in the form of richly diverse ecological communities, has been separated by humanity and compartmentalized, the compartments being those smallish reserves, refuges, and national parks that we feel we can conveniently afford to set aside. The minatory message of the species-area relationship and of William Newmark's work is that this approach won't work. For the long term, it won't work. Nature can't be compartmentalized. Nature isn't convenient. Nature is inherently big.